Episode 4, Shadow of the Ridge, Alabama Cryptids. Alabama Bigfoot, the Knock in the Woods. There are places in Alabama where the forest stretches for miles without interruption. Places where the trees grow thick enough to swallow sound, and once the sun sets, the woods feel deeper than they should. This encounter happened in October of 2003 inside Talladega National Forest, one of the largest wilderness areas in the state. The witness, a man named Harold, had gone camping alone for a weekend deer scouting trip. He'd hunted in those woods for years and knew the trails better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. That's why what happened that night didn't make sense. Not to someone who understood the forest. Harold set up camp just before sunset, about a mile off the main trail, near a clearing he'd used before. He built a small fire, cooked dinner, and settled in for the night, like he'd done dozens of times. At first, everything was normal. Crickets, wind moving through the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl somewhere in the distance. Then came the first sound. Knock. Sharp, solid, like wood striking wood. Harold froze, holding still as he listened. Maybe another hunter was nearby, someone hammering or chopping wood late into the evening. But the sound came again. Knock. This time, closer, too close, and too loud. Harold stood slowly, stepping away from the firelight into the darker edge of the clearing. He listened carefully, waiting for another sound that would make sense of it. Instead, he heard something else. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Not the light, quick steps of a deer. Not the slow, padded movement of a black bear. These steps were deliberate, measured, and loud enough that he could feel them through the ground. That's when the woods went silent. Every insect, every night sound, gone. Harold grabbed his flashlight and swept the beam across the tree line. At first, he saw nothing, just trunks and shadows. Then the light caught movement. Something tall, standing behind a thick oak tree. He thought it was another hunter at first. Maybe someone wearing dark clothing. But when it shifted slightly, stepping into partial view, he realized what he was looking at wasn't human. It was massive, at least 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that blended into the forest shadows. Its shoulders were broad, far broader than any man he'd ever seen, and its arms, they were long, long enough that its hands hung close to its knees. Harold couldn't move, couldn't speak. The creature leaned slightly forward, stepping into the faint glow of the firelight. That's when he saw its face. Not clearly, but enough to know it wasn't an animal he recognized. Its eyes reflected the flashlight beam, glowing faintly as it stared straight at him. Watching, studying, not afraid, not curious, just aware. Then came another sound. Knock. But this time, it didn't come from the woods. It came from behind him. Harold spun around, flashlight shaking in his hand. Another knock echoed from the opposite side of the clearing. Then another, further away, like something, or multiple somethings, were answering each other, communicating. Harold felt fear rise in his chest in a way he'd never felt before. Not panic, not yet, but something deeper. The feeling of being watched, surrounded. That's when the creature moved. It stepped fully into the clearing, revealing its full size in the flickering firelight. Massive, muscular, covered in thick matted hair. It let out a low sound, not a roar, not a growl, but something deeper. A rumbling grunt that vibrated in the air like distant thunder. Harold didn't wait to see what would happen next. He backed toward his truck, never taking his eyes off the creature. Another knock echoed through the woods behind him. Then another, and another. He climbed into the truck, slammed the door shut, and started the engine with shaking hands. The headlights swept across the clearing. For just a second, the creature stood fully illuminated, watching him, still, silent. Then it turned and walked into the trees. Not running, not crashing through brush, just walking, like it knew the woods belonged to it. Harold drove out of Talladega National Forest that night, and never returned to that exact campsite again. But weeks later, he went back during daylight to gather the gear he'd left behind. That's when he noticed the footprints. Huge impressions, pressed into the soft earth near the edge of the clearing. Longer than his boot, wider than his hand, and spaced far enough apart to suggest a stride longer than any man could make. He took photos, measured them, but never shared them publicly. Because once you've seen something that shouldn't exist, you stop worrying about proof, and start worrying about whether you were ever truly alone in the woods.